How would you like to reflect your plea?
Your Honor, on behalf of Mrs. Daybell, she enters a not guilty plea to both charges and a request for a pretrial and a jury trial.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Terri Austin, and you're watching the Law&Crime Report. The clip you just saw was Lori Vallow Daybell pleading not guilty to conspiracy to destroy evidence. Lori and her husband, Chad Daybell, have still not been charged with murder in connection with the disappearance of Lori's two children, Tylee and JJ. The children's remains were found on Chad's property back in June. They both face a series of charges, including 2 felony counts of conspiracy to commit destruction of evidence. Let me introduce my esteemed panel: criminal defense attorney Gabriela Gonzalez and forensic expert Joseph Scott Morgan. Gigi, I'm going to turn to you first. Is it a surprise that Lori entered a not guilty plea? I know that's common, but in your experience, have you ever seen a defendant who actually pled guilty or took a plea deal? What are the chances that that would happen?
So the not guilty plea is definitely the most common. This is the first step of the trial process. So you usually want to plead not guilty. That way you have time to get discovery, review all of the evidence, and figure out which way is the best way forward. When you see a guilty plea at arraignment, it's usually because either A, the evidence is so overwhelming, the defendant would rather just take responsibility and keep it moving, or because the defendant is going to enjoy certain benefits from pleading guilty. Maybe there is some sort of deal in works with the government in order for him to get a more favorable plea by working together with them. Whatever it may be, definitely not guilty pleas are much more common at the arraignment than guilties.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Joseph, let me turn to you. There doesn't seem to be any direct evidence against Lori as it relates to this charge of conspiracy to commit destruction of evidence. What evidence could the prosecution have against her in connection with that particular charge?
I think that this is going to come down to things like access to the children, the histrionics behind that, and also I think at the end of the day, what's going to be kind of the nail that holds this whole thing together is going to be digital forensics. You know, everything from text messages to pings on cell phones. You know, this idea of where can you place these individuals, and we're talking about individuals that, you know, have entered into a conspiracy, a criminal conspiracy. And so there has to be planning, there has to be connectivity, there has to be dialogue along the way. And as you well know, Terri, in this world that we live in, we leave a trail of breadcrumbs, electronic breadcrumbs everywhere we go. And I can tell you the prosecution is going to exploit that. Yeah,
I agree. Gigi, the prosecution has actually made a motion to join the 2 cases, Lori and Chad's. Lori's attorneys so far haven't joined in that motion. If, in fact, the cases are joined, how do you think that will affect the prosecution?
Well, it definitely makes it easier for the prosecution, right? Instead of having to host 2 separate trials for 2 different defendants for basically the same charges, you merge them together, and now the prosecution only has to focus on establishing 1 trial, 1 set of evidence for 2 defendants. So it's definitely benefiting the state. As far as Lori and Chad, I would imagine that they would try to argue it because A, you're going to make the state work harder, and B, the state will have to present evidence to support defendant A and defendant B instead of the 2 together.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Listen, we know that Chad Daybell also entered a guilty plea last month. Let's take a look at that clip.
And at this time, the court will summarize the charges from the information that was filed by the state on August 17th. The information alleges in count 1, the crime of destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence, a felony under Idaho Code 18-2603. That charge carries a punishment of up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. Mr. Daybell, do you understand that charge and the possible maximum penalties?
Yes.
Count 2, Mr. Daybell charges conspiracy to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence. That's a felony under Idaho Code 18-2603 and also Idaho Code 18-1701. That charge also carries a punishment of up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. Do you understand count 2, the charge, and the possible penalties?
Yes.
Count 3 is contained in the information charges destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence, a felony under Idaho Code 182603. That charge also carries a punishment of up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. Do you understand the charge in count 3 and the possible penalties?
Yes.
And finally, count 4 charges conspiracy to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence. That's a felony under Idaho Code 182603 and 181701. And it also carries a punishment of up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. Do you understand that charge and those possible penalties?
Yes. Judge, at this time, we are prepared to go forward for the entry of a plea. Mr. Daybell, on behalf of Mr. Daybell, we will enter a plea of not guilty to all of the charges and obviously request a pretrial and a jury trial, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Pryor, the not guilty pleas will be entered as to counts 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the information.
So you heard there, Chad Daybell pled not guilty. It would have been great if he had pled guilty, but he pled not guilty. Joseph, let me turn to you. We know that the remains of Tylee and JJ were found in Chad's backyard. That's pretty strong circumstantial evidence. Do you think the case for destruction of evidence, because that's all we have right now, is strong as it relates to Chad?
To a certain degree. And listen, I'm a simple guy. I require word pictures. Let me give you a word picture. I use the term, this idea of these individuals entering into a conspiracy. And I like to think of a three-legged stool. Well, we have a three-legged stool here. The problem is one of the legs is gone now with Alex Cox. That's Lori Vallow's brother, who I think was, in this whole deal from the beginning. He's gone now. And so that's going to make this rather difficult moving forward, because I think that he was neck deep in this. I think he had a lot to do with the disposal of these remains, the burying, and of course the horrible reality of dismemberment and burning. So I think that could potentially create a problem.
Yeah, I think it could create a big problem. So Gigi, listen, the prosecution has also filed a motion to change venue. Do you think that is going to succeed? Or rather, the defense attorney has filed a motion to change venue. Do you think that will succeed? And if so, how might it change the case?
It might succeed. The last case that we looked into that had a change of venue was the Iowa corn husk killer. These are small towns where people, hear secrets and things about people very, very quickly. So a change of venue may be appropriate if the defense can prove that the pool of potential jurors have been contaminated by the facts of this case. And also, the media has been discussing the aspects of this case since almost its inception, So this is a case that has gotten widespread media attention. Is a change of venue really going to affect that when the entire state has seen this case on television one way or another? That's something the defense is going to have to prove.
It always surprises me when you have a case like this that is such a high-profile case, and then the defense moves for a change of venue. That is going to be very difficult because everyone has heard about the case, and if the jury says that they will be fair, then that is the main point. Joseph, let's turn to you for a second. There have been so many deaths around this couple. Lori's 2 children, of course, Lori's ex-husbands, including Charles Vallow, 2 of her ex-husbands, Lori's brother, Alex, and Chad's former wife, Tammy. Let's look at Charles Vallow for a second. We know that he was killed back in July 2019 because Alex came to the house, Charles came to Lori's house and shot him, claiming that it was self-defense. Lori is now a person of interest in that case. The authorities have said that they're reviewing materials and they may turn it over to the prosecution in, 4 to 6 months. Why is it taking so long? They have warrants, they have subpoenas, but what are they looking at?
I think the thing is so highly complex and complicated. And here's another problem as well. It's a multi-jurisdictional case. You've got all and as well as prosecutorial agencies that are involved in this. And I think that it is highly complex. It gives you pause to think, well, are they playing catch up? Is everybody on the same page? And when you begin to think about this conspiracy issue, was he so imbalanced that, you ask the question, could she have lit a fire beneath Alex and kind of cut him loose? They knew he had access to a firearm. All you have to say is the right trigger word to him to get him to go off on this guy. Of course, that tale will never be told because both of these fellows are dead now.
Well, that's exactly right. It's really a very difficult case when you have Alex, the one who actually shot Charles Vallow, and he's gone. And obviously, Charles Vallow is gone. It's going to be very difficult to figure out what actually happened. So let's just take a break now. And when we come back, we will be looking at Brianna Taylor.
We are here at the Capitol in Kentucky to declare that Breonna Taylor will not be disrespected. That Breonna Taylor will not be unprotected. That Breonna Taylor will not be neglected. Because her life matters. Breonna Taylor life matters. Breonna Taylor life matters. Breonna Taylor life matters. Nobody's paying attention to it. They're trying to sweep it under the rug. And you all in Kentucky know they're trying to sweep it under the rug because y'all saw that bogus police report.
Welcome back, everyone. That was Ben Crump speaking about Breonna Taylor's death. Taylor was killed back in March, and a grand jury has finally been impaneled to investigate her shooting, which occurred in Louisville, Kentucky. She was 26 years old, an aspiring nurse. She was fatally shot after police broke down her apartment door while executing a no-knock warrant. None of the police officers involved in the raid have been charged with a crime, although Officer Hankinson was fired for violating police procedures. The attorney for one of the other officers, Jonathan Mattingly, said he was just following orders. Gigi, you heard Ben Crump there talking about Breonna Taylor. We will not forget Breonna Taylor. The fact that he is speaking on her behalf and on the behalf of others who have been shot by the police recently, including obviously George Floyd and many others. Do you think that will help bring the case to trial?
I wish I could say yes. Ben Crump is an incredibly zealous advocate. His speech that we just heard moved me. You can tell that he believes in Breonna Taylor and does not wish for her to be disrespected, nor should she be disrespected. She is an everyday hero, and her death is completely inappropriate. However, we see time and time again that police officers cases are sent to grand juries and the grand jury returns no indictments, So do I wish this zealot advocacy would lead to a trial for the murders of Breonna Taylor? Yes. Is it likely to happen? No.
Right. Joseph, I'm going to turn to you. We know that this case is being investigated, and the Attorney General actually said that there are conflicting rumors out there about the investigation and that these rumors are not going to help. But what he's saying is that it takes time. Why is it taking so long to do this investigation? Is it the fact that ballistics is involved? What is keeping them from bringing charges?
Well, I think that probably more than likely it's the political nuance of everything. Science is pretty straightforward, and you can do these tests relatively quickly. Sometimes they're layered and complicated. You've got multiple weapons in play here, but at the end of the day, it's been my experience, particularly working in the realm of medical examiners and coroners' offices, that sometimes they take their cues from other people, dependent upon the temperature. And so that's one of the things that could possibly be at work. Also, the feds are involved in this. It's not just simply the people in Kentucky that are handling this case. The feds have been brought in, which they should have been, in a police-related shooting like this, and they have all of their mechanisms in place to process all of this evidence. So you're looking at a bureaucratic nightmare as to what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Exactly. Gigi, we know that there is a wrongful death lawsuit pending. What's involved in that? What exactly are the attorneys trying to claim as far as what went wrong here?
Well, Ben Crump is going to allege that the officers were negligent, that they breached a duty, and that breach caused damages. And we know there's damages, right? Brianna Taylor's dead. Was there negligence? That's one of the things that is going to be a big battle. You know, the officers are going to allege that they executed this warrant in good faith and that they felt a reasonable fear of impending death or great bodily injury when they heard gunshots coming from inside towards them. You know, that's where the big fight is happening here, right? Whether these officers negligently shot Breonna Taylor. You know, and if Ben Crump is able to prove successfully that they were negligent and that they breached a duty, then they're going to prevail in this lawsuit.
Exactly. Let's switch gears now to the case of Alexandra Zarini. She's the 35-year-old granddaughter of Aldo Gucci, the man who built a huge fashion empire. Zarini's filed a lawsuit alleging that her stepfather, Joseph Ruffalo, sexually abused her over a period of 16 years while her mother and grandmother covered up the abuse. Let's take a look at the video released by Zarini.
My name is Alexandra Zarini. I am filing a lawsuit against my stepfather, mother, grandmother, and others because I was sexually abused by my stepfather, Joseph Ruffalo, from the age of 6 years old. My mother, Patricia Gucci, and grandmother, Bruna Palombo, did not protect me. They did not shield me. They allowed it to happen. But I am coming forward publicly today because as hard as this is for me, I feel it is my duty to expose the misconceptions about child sexual abuse and to raise awareness that every single day, we, as a society, are failing to protect the most vulnerable and innocent among us, our children. If you think this doesn't happen here in Beverly Hills, then you should know that my perpetrator still lives in California, spends time at the Bel Air Country Club, and volunteers in your children's hospitals. This is not something that only happens to other families in other neighborhoods or other countries. It is everywhere and happens to children in all countries, all states, all ethnic backgrounds, and all neighborhoods. I'm also speaking out because when I was abused and sexually assaulted, I had no one to protect me, no one to save me, and no one who did anything about it. This is far too common. There needs to be accountability for those people who look away and who don't stop child sexual abuse from happening. That inaction is costing us lives and robbing children of their future. Once children have been abused, they will struggle to come forward because they believe they will be judged. But it is the perpetrators and those who protect them that need to be judged, not the survivors. Survivors of child sexual abuse, myself included, will tell you that this is one of the worst things that can happen to you. You lose your childhood, and you fight against the painful legacy abuse leaves with you.
Joseph, that was a very powerful statement. But when you break it down, it really is a he said, she said. What type of forensic evidence might we have in a case like this?
When you have cases involving alleged sexual abuse, it's very difficult to study physical evidence when you haven't collected any physical evidence. But Terry, here's the key in my opinion. Think about if everyone at home will just think about how many doctor's visits do you think you had over a 16-year period? This young girl is going from childhood, prepubescence, pubescence, and then she enters into adulthood. And this is a female child, so she would had to go through gynecological examinations to boot. So one of my thoughts is this: I think that if this lawsuit goes forward and say people are deposed, I think you're going to see people like a pediatrician that may have seen her, that conducted an exam on her, and also her gyno exams as well. And those records will be brought to light. Did you see, doctor, did you see any evidence at that time? What do these notes mean that you, because right now it's almost retroactive examination. It's really all that you have to hang your hat on from a physical standpoint.
Exactly. I think records are really important in this case. And Gigi, apparently, Zarini filed a police report which alleged the abuse, and that was with the Beverly Hills Police Department. And the paper actually confirmed that the police file remains open. Will this help her case?
Absolutely. For the reasons Dr. Joseph Morgan just said, this is essentially going to be a he said versus she said, right? We don't have the type of physical evidence that you would want to see in a sexual abuse case in order to determine, a decision. So we're going to be relying on the words of the parties and also these types of records that back up the words of the parties, right? So medical records, police reports. If Zarini ever said this, what happened to her to any of her colleagues, friends, people in passing, doctors, what have you. That's what's going to build the case for Zarini. So this police report is incredibly helpful to verify her story versus his.
Right, exactly. It's a good thing we have that. So, Joseph, I wanted to ask you this question. We know that Rufalo's lawyer actually stated that Zarini was suffering some mental well-being and that, they took steps to help her. Do you think that ultimately this is going to come down to a battle of the medical experts, with the defendant saying that, the daughter, the plaintiff here, actually had some mental illness, and then obviously Alexandra saying, no, in fact, it had nothing to do with that, and her doctor saying she was perfectly sane and that, this really occurred?
Counsel better take care of drawing the sword, because if he crosses swords in this area, I've read a lot of reports over my career, medical records and stuff, and this is a big area that will be examined. If she's been taken in for therapy and she releases those records, and in those confidential files, she begins to talk about, well, yeah, this is what all of this is rooted in. It stems from this abuse. Or, the doctor makes notes. Listen, everything in those files, any kind of sideline notes that the doctor makes relative to their impression of her at that particular given time, that's admissible, okay? Because that's a matter of record. It's not just what she says, it's the expert's opinion and evaluation of what she was saying at that time. This is a very, very dangerous slope that this attorney is going down. So I hope they're prepared.
Well, let's watch that case very closely. Meanwhile, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, her company.
You look at, just to be able to manage a therapy, the amount of blood that they take, how bruised their arms become, it is really traumatic. And the first time that I saw it, I remember I was with a woman, and I walked out, and I just remember saying to myself, I have to do something in my life about this. And that yeah, absolutely.
Welcome back. That was Elizabeth Holmes being interviewed back in 2015 before she and her tech company, Theranos, were accused of criminal fraud. Holmes is now seeking a quote-unquote mental defense, for her criminal fraud trial. Holmes founded the biotech company in 2003, claiming that it revolutionized blood testing. The failed company was once valued at $9 billion. Holmes was indicted on federal wire fraud charges back in June 2018, along with the former CEO of the company. The indictment alleged they engaged in a multi-million-dollar scheme to defraud investors, doctors, patients, and the public in general. They could face up to 20 years in prison. The trial was delayed due to the pandemic, and it's now slated to start in March of 21. Now, Joseph, let me ask you, people tend to pick apart her demeanor. As you saw in that clip, you know, she's wearing all black, and she did that all the time. Her voice is lower. And in fact, I remember seeing something where she said, you know, she practiced using this lower voice. Her expressions and her body language are really sort of flat. Do you think that's going to help or hurt her mental disease claim?
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of hate that's been made over this. Quite possibly, they could say that she's trying to take on another persona and this sort of thing. But at the end of the day, the reality is this: she created a multi-billion-dollar fraud. And listen, there's a lot of players involved in this, and people, the kind of people I come from, out here in flyover country, as they say, you might not know some of the big names, the companies, these kind of biotech companies and stuff. But let me give you an example. One of the people that she's gotten involved in with this is Walgreens. They were hitched to her. They were going to start testing centers. So, that's something that people at home can kind of identify with as part of this fraud. So this is complex. I don't know how much of a mental defect she might have going into this thing. I think that she's rather distraught now, though.
Yes, I agree with these charges against her. Gigi, this is the first time I've heard of a mental illness defense in a criminal fraud case. What exactly do you think the defense will be claiming? What type of evidence are they going to present other, than the way she may have dressed?
They're going to have to bring medical experts. They're going to have to bring an established medical history of, serious mental illness, because they're going to have to prove that this mental defect is what caused her to commit millions of dollars of fraud. And, so far we have an eccentric woman who likes to wear all black, which I don't think is necessarily indicative of mental illness. I hope not. And she's a very capable and brilliant woman. So the defense is going to have to work very hard in order to prove that she's got significant mental illness that caused her to commit this fraud.
I agree, and let's hope wearing all black is not a sign of having a mental illness, because we'd all have some issues there. Joseph, the judge is allowing the prosecution to hire 2 medical experts, a psychologist and a psychiatrist, to examine Holmes for 14 hours over 2 days. Do you think that's excessive? It sounds like a lot of time for an examination.
Yeah, it kind of is. I wonder what kind of battery of tests that they will be applying to her over that period of time, to kind of vet her standing mentally. I don't know. Yeah, it does kind of seem that long. That is a very long period of time. I just wonder if these are 2 separate entities that are going to conduct 2 separate batteries of tests. Written, they could be an examination face-to-face, this sort of thing, cognitive testing. So, yeah, I guess it could take that long, but yeah, it does seem like a long time.
Right. Gigi, the judge said that these exams can occur. The judge also said that they can be videotaped. If they're admitted into evidence, do you think that's going to hurt or help the defense?
I think the video evidence would help if you're able to prove on video that this woman is suffering from mental illnesses, then it's obviously beneficial to the defense, right? If not, bringing it in is certainly going to hurt, because you're trying to establish that this woman committed this act because of mental defects. So if the video shows that she's perfectly coherent and fine, it's definitely going to hurt.
Exactly. Joseph, let's go back a second to the company itself, Theranos. I know that the company was trying to find a rapid blood test, and they developed this device which would help. But some of the employees were saying that the company was misrepresenting how well the device was actually performing. Do you think that they were trying to do a good thing here in developing this device and it just failed? I mean, should they have been given more time to try to make this work?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what the point is, where you can have this quick detection of diseases. Look, we've got things now in forensics like rapid DNA, where we can take samples and run the unknown sample and get a profile generated in a pretty short period of time. And even now, I see these commercials on television for these sensors that you can put on your body for diabetes and this sort of thing. But what she's talking about doing, Terry, this mechanism is something that where it's going to take a small sample and they're going to try to do this broad spectrum of disease calculation. And here's the key: it was never peer reviewed. And the scientific community got hold of this very, very quickly. These meetings, these people are scratching their heads and they're thinking, look, for years and years and years, we've had to take high volumes of blood to conduct all of these tests. And this person she went to Stanford, she never finished. To the best of my knowledge, she's not a research scientist. And all of a sudden, out of the clear blue sky, she comes up with this device. It stinks to high heaven to begin with, but she got a lot of people to buy into it.
Exactly. Well, we know when it comes to medicine that you have to be very careful. Let's switch gears now to the Epstein case. A judge delayed the trial of the 2 guards who were charged with covering up their failure to protect Epstein the night he killed himself. As we know, Epstein was arrested in July 2019 on federal charges for sex trafficking minors in both Florida and New York, actually. He died in his cell on August 10th, 2019. The medical examiner ruled the death a suicide, although Epstein's lawyers have disputed the ruling, as has the public. Tova Noel and Michael Thomas, the 2 guards, now face a June 14, 2021 trial date for falsely certifying that they conducted inmate count during Epstein's final hours. Gigi, does this sound like to you that they are using these guards as a scapegoat for failure, actually, to make sure the prison had enough guards on duty? What's your thought about that?
These 2 guards of cover-up, and I believe the defense should be that the government is using them to cover up. The Federal Prison Bureau, the Bureau of Federal Prisons, has been suffering budget cuts. These prison guards have to work double shifts for multiple days in a row in order to make sure that the prisons are secured. I'm not going to even say properly secured. These guards are overworked, underpaid, undersupported, and, this is an accident waiting to happen. And if this was any other inmate, I don't think the government would be holding these guards accountable. But because it's Jeffrey Epstein and he's an incredibly high-profile defendant, someone's got to go down for it. So why not these 2 overworked, underpaid prison guards? They're the perfect scapegoat for the government, and it's a shame.
I think you're right about that. I think it's a bigger issue than these 2 guards. But in fact, Joseph, if they conducted an inmate count during Epstein's final hours, and they didn't, do you think that, 1, it was a cover-up, and 2, should they be prosecuted for that?
Well, look, it reaches beyond them. And let me tell you why. If you guys have not seen, I encourage anybody out there to take a look at the images from the interior of Epstein's cell. The word that I would use is squalid. When you take a look at, there's ripped up material all over the place, clothing, cloth. He's sleeping on the floor. It looks to be potentially, some people have said, a CPAP machine on the floor with an electrical cord. There's all kinds of stuff. There's even prescription medications on the top bunk, which was absent a mattress. So this goes just beyond these 2 guards. There is a problem, an institutional problem with this place, as well as federal prison system potentially. Because, listen, this is one of the key locations for federal prisoners in, the largest metropolitan area in the nation. And this is the best they can do. This place is a horror show.
Well, yeah, I've heard that before, that MCC, Metropolitan Correction Center, is a horror show. And Gigi, the fact that we know Jeffrey Epstein attempted suicide before, but he was on suicide watch. And apparently he was moved out of suicide watch. And that's when this happened. Do you think that was a mistake on the part of the Prison Bureau to move him out of suicide watch?
You know, from as a Monday morning quarterback, yeah, absolutely, it was a huge mistake. But you know, as we discussed, the prisons are understaffed, underpaid. You know, and they're trying to make decisions on behalf of hundreds of inmates. And at the time, Epstein was taken into suicide watch. It was determined that he is no longer a risk of suicide, so he was released. I mean, at the end of the day, obviously, we didn't want Jeffrey Epstein to commit suicide or to meet his demise, but it happened, and it's the result of an understaffed and underworked prison.
Exactly. Joseph, one of the reports was the Prison Bureau sent the videotape from Jeffrey Epstein's floor to have it preserved during the very first attempt to commit suicide. Turns out that tape was the wrong tape, and now they don't have a tape. I am not a conspiracy theorist, and they don't have any tape for the second, apparently. What are your thoughts about the fact that the Prison Bureau sent the wrong tape to be preserved?
The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. I mean, that seems to be the case all the way through. Other than that, you have no other option than to go with theories that are out there about what happened. They're their own worst enemy in this whole thing. It's really hard, and I'm not talking about the guards. It's really hard for me to feel sympathy, for them in this case. It's very simple. Do what you're supposed to do. And this whole thing about cutting him loose from suicide watch. What epiphanal moment did the clinician have where they suddenly said, "Oh, well, you're no longer suicidal. We're going to move you to this other location." I want to see what kind of evaluation they did, and what's the standard? What's the standard that the Bureau of Prisons uses to examine these people with? How many other people are there in danger because this clinician, whoever it is, has made this determination about other people? How many other suicide attempts are there? How many other attempts at self-harm are there? How many violent outbursts are there because you've inappropriately evaluated a prisoner?
That's right. It sounds like those standards need to be elevated for sure. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the case against Robert Hadden.
Today we announced charges against Robert Hadden for sexually abusing women under the guise of purported medical examinations from between 1993 and 2012. Hadden was taken into custody this morning in New Jersey and will be presented this afternoon before Magistrate Judge Robert Lehrberger. The case has been assigned to United States District Judge Richard M. Berman. As alleged, between 1993 and 2012, Hadden sexually abused dozens of women and girls during OB/GYN examinations at his medical offices in Manhattan.
Welcome back. That was Audrey Strauss announcing the charges against gynecologist Robert Hadden. Hadden is a former gynecologist in New York. He was charged in connection with the alleged sexual attacks of 6 patients, one of whom was a minor who he had previously delivered. The wife of former presidential candidate Andrew Yang came forward in an interview with CNN about sexual abuse from Hadden. Let's take a look at what she had to say.
The examinations became longer, more frequent, and I learned that they were unnecessary most of the time. Most women don't know what you're supposed to get when you're pregnant. I didn't know that you're not supposed to get an exam every time you went to see the doctor. I feel like I put up with some inappropriate behavior that I didn't know at the time was straight up sexual abuse / sexual assault.
Powerful interview. Gigi, do you think the fact that Andrew Yang's wife is one of the individuals who is alleging sexual assault, will that help in the case brought against Hadden?
Yes, it will, because she's high profile, and she also inspired, because she spoke out and was brave to tell her story. Other women who are also victimized by this doctor also came forward. So yes, her testimony is very powerful and very helpful in this case.
Yes, Joseph, you know, we talked earlier about medical records. It seems that in this case also, medical records of all of the individuals will be very important. Do you agree? I mean, to what extent are they going to have to analyze those records carefully?
Oh, well, I can tell you this. They're going to have a bevy of medical experts that will review the records. And what the measurement, what the benchmark will be for this, Terry, is what is required of an OBGYN examination per the AMA. Okay, so they'll use that standard. And what Mrs. Yang was mentioning in her interview, if it doesn't marry up with that, then there is no explanation why you would have to go as far as you went. And, you know, this extends not just to adult women, this extends to allegedly minors as well. And so what in the world are you doing having these women come in and being, you know, I guess he could say he was being thorough. I don't know. I guess that would be his only defense. But if it doesn't marry up with what the industry standard is, it's going to be a problem.
Exactly. And you know, Gigi, you are in such a vulnerable position when you are in the office of your OBGYN. The fact that he would take advantage of women, particularly young women, is particularly offensive. Do you think that, you know, if and when this does go to trial, that will play a factor?
Absolutely. What he's the crimes that he's alleged to be committed are disgusting and disturbing, mostly because these women trusted this doctor. And like you said, they're incredibly vulnerable. Some of these women pregnant, most of these women young. They're trusting this doctor to guide them through this examination and doing what is necessary, medically necessary, to ensure their good health. And instead, he's inflicting incredible distress upon them. It is very disturbing. And if the government can prove it, he's in for a very serious punishment for these crimes.
Exactly. You know, when these women get on the stand, Joseph, it's very difficult. And I know you've seen lots of trials. How do you think that the defense is going to approach these women on the stand? How should they, you know, navigate those very delicate, sensitive issues?
These, you know, this is not some event where an individual, you know, slips someone something in their drink at a party or anything like this. These are women, as you said, that are so very vulnerable. I mean, their guard is completely down. You know, there's a reason you take the Hippocratic Oath, I shall do no harm. And so you have an expectation when you walk in that you're going to be protected and safe in that environment. Obviously, these women weren't. So defense is they're going to be walking a tightrope in this, Terry, because any indication that they're being heavy-handed with these poor victims it's not going to bode well for them.
Right, I agree with that. It's going to be very difficult. Gigi, we know that Hadden was actually charged in New York State Court in 2014 on very similar allegations, actually against 6 other women. He took a plea deal there, but he served no jail time. He did not have to register as a sex offender. He did, however, lose his medical license. Do you think that was enough? And do you think that here on these charges, the current charges, there's not going to be a plea deal, that the case will actually be prosecuted?
The loss of his medical license was not enough. You know, what he was alleged and accused of committing and what he pled guilty to are disgusting and heinous crimes. And when we consider that someone who pees in a park has to register as a sex offender, but a doctor who takes advantage of vulnerable patients of his is not, it's pretty disturbing. And, you know, I think if this case goes to trial, that's going to definitely come up.
Exactly. Real quick, what are the chances, Gigi, that you think the case will come to trial?
Pretty good.
Okay, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the prosecution and the state has learned their lesson. They're not going to allow this case to go to a plea deal. Listen, I want to thank my guest and welcome, for the next week. Come back, please, and have a great weekend.